Now, before we read chapter 27 together, and we're getting down to the end of the book because there are only 30 chapters in the book, so we've got 4 more. Before we read chapter 27, I want us to remember what we had been thinking about in recent chapters. We've been thinking about how characters' actions and things that they say and do can be very valuable to us. It's like what a character does and says are windows into that character's personality. When a character does something, it helps us to see through, to see what they're really like. Let's practice that again with this chapter, chapter 27. Let's take the actions of the characters to help us see them for who they are. The first key slid into the first lock so smoothly that it made Rob dizzy with amazement. It was going to be so easy to let the tiger go. "Hurry," Sistine said to him. "Hurry up. Get the other locks." He opened the second lock and the third, and then he took them off one by one and handed them to Sistine, who laid them on the ground. "Now open the door," she said. Rob's heart pounded and fluttered in his chest. "What if he eats us?" he asked. "He won't," said Sistine. "He'll leave us alone out of gratitude. We're his emancipators." Rob flung the door wide. "Get out of the way," he shouted, and they both jumped back from the door and waited. But the tiger ignored them. He continued to pace back and forth in the cage, oblivious to the open door. "Go on," Rob said to him. "You're free," Sistine whispered. But the tiger did not even look in the direction of the door. Sistine crept forward and grabbed hold of the cage. She shook it. "Get out!" she screamed. "Come on," she said, turning to Rob. "Help me. Help me get him out." Rob grabbed hold of the fence and shook it. "Get," he said. The tiger stopped pacing and turned to stare at them both, clinging like monkeys to the cage. "Go on," Rob shouted, suddenly furious. He shook the cage harder. He yelled. He put his head back and howled, and he saw that the sky above them was thick with clouds, and that made him even angrier. He yelled louder. He shouted at the dark sky. He shook the cage as hard as he could. Sistine put a hand on his arm. "Shh," she said. "He's leaving. Watch." As they stared, the tiger stepped with grace and delicacy out of the cage. He put his nose up and sniffed. He took one tiny step and then another. Then he stopped and stood still. Sistine clapped her hands, and the tiger turned and looked back at them both, his eyes blazing. And then he started to run. He ran so fast, it looked to Rob like he was flying. His muscles moved like a river. It was hard to believe that a cage had ever contained him. It didn't seem possible. The tiger went leaping through the grass, moving farther and farther away from Rob and Sistine. He looked like the sun, rising and setting again and again. And watching him go, Rob felt his own heart rising and falling, beating in time. You know, there were a lot of great windows of opportunity. Open the shutters for us to learn about these characters, especially Sistine and Rob. Those are the characters from this chapter, of course. And the things they did and said really spoke and told us about them. For example, Sistine yelled, "Get out!" She screamed. She grabbed the cage and shook it. Then Rob grabbed hold of the fence on the cage, and he shook it. "Get," he said. Then the tiger stopped pacing. It stopped still, and it turned to look at them. And then Rob shouted again, "Go on!" He shook the cage harder and he yelled. He put his head back and howled. These actions tell me that Rob is really like letting loose. He is changing now. Sistine is allowing him to feel free. Look at how he's howling and shaking the cage violently. I wouldn't have expected him to do that, but it tells me that he is feeling really caught up in this moment. And he's really excited. And it's giving him different emotions. He's getting angry. Maybe he's feeling sadness inside too. Maybe he's feeling kind of happy inside because of the tiger getting let out and he's doing it. Could be anything. Your job is to pick a part in this chapter. Pick one part where the window was wide open and you could see right into a character. And your job is to tell about it. Using at least 4 sentences, tell about a part where you saw into the character based on what they did or what they said. Enjoy.